Hello, everyone. My name is Angie Frias. I'm an attorney here in California, in San Diego, and I'm here to talk about landlord-tenant laws. These are some slides. I'm part of the San Diego Eviction Prevention Collaborative, and we put together this presentation using slides that Legal Aid Society of San Diego provided to us. This presentation gives you general information about your rights. It doesn't cover every law. There are too many, but we are here to answer questions afterwards if you have any questions. These are the topics that we're going to cover today: applying for tenancy, changes to a rental agreement, rent increases, COVID-19 rental assistance and temporary laws, just cause, and what community resources are available. The first topic, applying for tenancy and what changes can be made to rental agreements. The list on the right are the types of things that a landlord can ask a tenant for, a potential tenant. So when a tenant applies for a unit to rent an apartment or a bedroom, the landlord can ask for all of this. They can ask for your employment records, your prior residence, banking information, how much income you have. They can ask about prior evictions and they can check on that. They can ask for you to sign a credit check and a background check. And they can require certain information that will tell them how much debt you have versus your income, and also how much income you have versus how much rent they want, so that they can make sure that that amount is, that your income is adequate to cover both your debt and your rent. These are the things under fair housing law that a landlord cannot ask you about. They cannot ask you about your race, color, religion. They can't ask you about disability or medical conditions. They're not allowed to ask if you have children or minors in the household, because only adults 18 and over need to be on the lease. They can't ask about immigration or citizenship status. And they can't ask about age unless the unit is specifically for people who are 55 plus. If they ask about these questions, it's a violation of the fair housing laws in California and in the United States. Rental agreements that you enter into when you want to rent the unit can be written or they can be oral or verbal. The only time that they have to be written is when you're going to rent the property for for a year or longer. Otherwise, they can be verbal or written. There are two types of leases. Typically, one is fixed term, which means it's for a period of time, 6 months or a year, and it will state that on the lease. The other type is called periodic, which is just every month it renews. These are the types of things that your lease should say if it's written, or that you should have an understanding verbally with your landlord. You should know who the landlord is, who you're dealing with. You should know the term of the rental period. Is it a 30-day month to month, or is it for 6 months, or 9 months, or a year? You should know the amount of rent to be paid and where and when you have to pay that rent. You should find out whom you pay the rent to and how you pay the rent. You should find out who's going to pay the utilities. You also can ask who can accept notices and other information for the landlord, if they have any what are called agents, any people working for them. We talked about how the rent is to be paid. And then the amount required for the security deposit. There are laws as to how much the landlord can ask for a security deposit. And so it's important to find out what the landlord expects and how that's to be paid. If you enter into a rental agreement and you want to make a change, if it's a fixed term lease, which means it's for that period of time that's fixed, there are no changes permitted during that lease unless the lease says it's allowed or both the landlord and the tenant agree to change the lease. So in a fixed lease, the landlord cannot change the lease terms on his own or her own. Month to month, the landlord can change it if they give 30 days notice, because it renews every 30 days. So it's a new lease every 30 days. If the landlord changes ownership or management, if they sell the property, they have to give notice to the tenant in writing of that change. So the next topic is rent increases. How much can a landlord increase your rent? So if you have a fixed term, that's 6 months, 12 months, whatever it is, there's no rent increase allowed unless the lease allows it or it's a particular type of affordable housing. This stands for low income housing tax credit. It's a specific type. Otherwise, there are no increases allowed with a fixed term lease. If you don't have a fixed term lease, if it's month to month, then the landlord can possibly increase it as much as he or she wants, but they have to give written notice. If they're increasing the rent up to 10%, they have to give 30 days written notice to the tenant. If they're increasing it more than that, they have to give 90 days written notice. And there's usually no limit for landlords to increase in this way unless if AB 1482 applies. And AB 1482 is a law that took effect January 1st, 2020. It limits the amount of rent increase that a landlord can make for certain properties. The types of properties that the law applies to are all properties except the ones listed here. So a tenant who lives in a single family home that's owned by an individual person, that landlord can raise the rent as much as they want. A person who lives in a unit, bless you, that was built within the last 15 years, the landlord is not limited by this law. All other properties, though, the landlord cannot raise the rent more than 5% plus the change in the cost of living, which right now is 4.1%. So if you live in a property not on this list, the landlord can only raise the rent 9.1% in a 12-month period. They they can only do it 2 times in that 12-month period. And they calculate the rent increase, the 9.1%, against the lowest rent charged during that 12-month period. So it's not a calendar, it's not based on when you started renting, it's just a 12-month period from the day the landlord wants to raise the rent. If the landlord rents it to a new family or a new individual, they are allowed to raise the rent as much as they want. So if you know someone living in a unit who's renting it for $1,000, and then you apply to rent it, and the landlord suddenly charges $2,000, they're allowed to do that because you're considered a brand new tenant. So the other thing I wanted to talk about is just cause. Just cause also is a law that took effect January 1st, 2020. Just cause means that in certain cases, a landlord has to have a reason to evict a tenant. They can have an at-fault reason or a no-fault reason, but they have to have a reason. At-fault means the tenant did something that gave the landlord a reason. No-fault means that the landlord had a reason of his own or her own to evict the tenant. But it has to be a certain reason listed in the law. There's only 3 or 4 of them. And this law applies both in the county of San Diego and the city of San Diego, but they're a little bit different. And I'll go through those differences. So if a landlord wants to terminate a tenancy, they have to give notice. They have to give written notice. And they have to give it to the person personally and possibly by mail, depending on how it's given to them. But it has to be written. And it has to state specific language that's in the law. And it has to state the period of time that the landlord is giving the tenant to leave. Could be 30 days, could be 60 days, it could be 3 days. It just depends on the reason. And as I said here, it may require just cause. So just cause is required for a landlord to give if the tenant has been in there for 12 months. There are certain types of housing, just like with rent increases, that they excluded. But you have to have been there for 12 months for just cause to apply. This is the state law. So it only applies if you live in the county, but not in the city of San Diego. The city of San Diego has its own just cause law that applies. In order for the city of San Diego's law to apply, you have to have lived in your unit for 24 months. These are the types of properties that do not have to have just cause. The landlord, some of them are similar to rent increases. So again, if your unit was built within the last 15 years, your landlord doesn't have to give you a reason to end the tenancy. They have to follow other rules, but they don't have to give a reason. They can just terminate it because. Same with single-family homes and condos that are owned by an individual person. That person or landlord does not have to give a reason. There are a couple of differences, but the list is pretty similar to rent increases. Now, the difference, though, is that if you live in the city of San Diego, their law, which requires a reason for termination, applies to all properties, no exclusions. So every landlord in the city of San Diego has to give a just cause reason if the tenant has lived there for more than 2 years. If a landlord wants to terminate the tenancy or evict someone for an at-fault reason, if that's required, these are their choices, and only these choices. Some of these, they can give a 3-day notice for. Non-payment of rent, they can give a 3-day notice. Breach of a lease term, they can give a 3-day notice. When you have this breach, for example, if a lease said no pets are allowed, and the tenant takes in a pet, the landlord finds out, the landlord gives the tenant a 3-day notice to cure or quit, which means that they have a chance, they have 3 days to fix the problem. If they don't, then the landlord will evict them. So if the tenant gets rid of the pet, the landlord cannot evict them. Waste is another word for serious damage. If a tenant causes serious damage to the property, the landlord will give a 3-day notice, and there will be no chance to fix the problem. Same with criminal activity. Same with nuisance. If a landlord is required to give a no-fault reason, so the tenant has either lived there for a year, if you live outside the city of San Diego, or for 2 years, if you live inside the city of San Diego, these are the only options the landlord has. They must give one of these reasons for evicting a tenant if the tenant hasn't done anything wrong. The owner wants to move in, or the owner's family. The owner wants to take all units on the parcel out of the rental market. They just want to get out of the rental business. They have a government order or court order that says that the unit has to be vacated, probably from code enforcement, because something is so seriously wrong that they need to fix it. Or the owner intends to substantially remodel the unit. If the tenant lives outside the city of San Diego and they fall under the state law, the landlord has to give them relocation assistance equal to 1 month's rent. But if they live in the city of San Diego, the city of San Diego does not have that law in its ordinance. So they don't have to give relocation assistance. Down here I say, but the city of San Diego no-fault eviction moratorium. And I'll explain that in a minute. So COVID-19 brought about rental assistance through the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, and it brought about a bunch of temporary laws. These laws changed the types of notices landlords had to give. They changed the language that had to be in there for the notices. They changed when a landlord could evict a tenant. And then they expired. San Diego, county and city also made some laws. And the CDC as well. All these laws apply to very limited circumstances. They have to do with rent that was not paid in 2020 and part of 2021. As of April 1st, 2022, every tenant has to pay their rent. There are no longer protections for tenants who have not paid their rent going forward. If a tenant has missed a rent payment in the past before April 1st, there are some protections if they applied for emergency rental assistance, or if the rent is from 2020. So this is a list of some of the things that have stayed from the laws, but generally there is not a whole lot left. There is masking. So if a landlord evicts a tenant, this means that if it was for non-payment of rent due to COVID-19 financial distress, the landlords can never find out about that case. It will not be on a credit record. The other thing is that the protections for those tenants who applied for emergency rental assistance, if they have a pending application, they cannot be evicted for those months right now. That's extended to June 30th, 2022. The other law just became a law, and that's the City of San Diego No-Fault Eviction Moratorium Ordinance. And that becomes effective May 19, 2022. If the law applies when a landlord is evicting a tenant for a no-fault eviction. So it doesn't apply to non-payment of rent. It doesn't apply to any of this other stuff. But if a landlord is trying to evict a tenant because they want to move in, they want to remodel the place, they want to take the property off the rental market, they will now have new rules to follow under this ordinance from May 19th, 2022 until September 30th, 2022. And those requirements are longer notice periods. They have to give you more time to move out. So finally, I wanted to talk about community resources because I couldn't cover everything today about the laws that a tenant should know. But there are a lot, and there are a lot of protections for tenants. One of these resources is ACE, the Alliance of Californians for Community Empowerment. If a tenant has a problem and they're not sure if it's a legal problem or just problems with the landlord is just not nice or is possibly doing illegal things, but you're just not sure, this could be a good place to start. These are the directors, both the City of San Diego and the county, and you can reach out to them by email or by phone, and they'll answer questions. These are free legal resources in the community. Legal Aid Society of San Diego can help if a tenant has a pending rental assistance application and gets a 3-day notice to leave because they didn't pay their rent. They're so swamped right now with calls that they can't really help with other issues. But luckily we have other resources. The San Diego Volunteer Lawyer Program has an eviction notice clinic. They offer that virtually on Thursday mornings. If a tenant gets a notice for 30 days or 60 days saying they have to leave, call this number or go to this email and sign up for that clinic. Because landlords often get the notices wrong. There's so many things they have to have in there and they don't understand, and they will often try to get around it, or they will forget they have to give relocation assistance. So this clinic can help figure that out. They know what goes in that notice, and they can help that. And even if the landlord in the end can evict a tenant, that tenant could possibly buy 30 or 60 days time to find a new place. So it's important to have every notice looked at. Community Law Project has walk-in clinics throughout San Diego in different locations. They are law students that are supervised by attorneys in the area, and they can give advice on things like, you need help getting your security deposit back, or you think you might be a victim of harassment or discrimination. They can help talk about that, possibly write a letter, or help you write a letter, or explain the law to you. They can also review a lease with you or answer questions about that. So if you go to their website, they have a calendar with all of the days of their clinics. And this is the website, www.housinghelpsd.org. This is the San Diego Eviction Prevention Collaborative. We post information from Legal Aid Society of San Diego, questions and answers about new laws and changes to laws. You can always check there. We have resources if there's rental assistance. There's 1 month away is a rental assistance program that we operate. We take private funds from donors, and we provide rental assistance through that program. So if you know a tenant that's going to miss a rental payment, then you can contact 1 month away through this website and apply for 1 month's rent payment to help get you through that month. Another great resource is the Partnership for the Advancement of New Americans, otherwise known as PANA. And Patricia is here today. She's going to talk more about the services that they offer and how they can be of assistance to tenants as well.
nhà lên kế bên cách thì đó lý do đó thì lên lo đã uống
So he has a question. He is on government assistance. He's currently receiving housing, the Section 8 housing, and he said that he's not able to pay rent. Right now he's paying $1,000 rent, but if he violates, like, for example, if they don't he has a pet, and if they want him to do the landscaping at his house, and he doesn't have the resources to do that, and other violations. So are they, do they have the right to evict him?
So I couldn't hear all of it. There's a loud part, but it sounded like it's Section 8 housing.
Yes.
Rent is being paid.
Rent, cái đền những trả tiền nhà.
housing nó trả những cái phòng thuê
So housing is paying half of it, and he's paying half of it.
Okay, and you're up to date with your payments. There are no missed payments.
thiếu gì
He missed the payments.
Okay, in which month?
How long?
công việc mà cái khúc trước á phí tiền nhà là được nhà nước trả, tức là xin March 2020 up to March 2021 nên là năm 22 đó. No, I'm sorry, March 2021 up to March 22nd. The governor gave me the pay over it. Okay. But after that, I don't have the money to pay for the rent. The house should already be on time. But my fault, my fault. I'm not able to pay on time.
Right. So I couldn't hear all the dates. March 2021 through which date?
So from March 2021 up until March 2022,
Okay.
He received the rental assistance. They have always been there on top, but then he missed after March 2022. He missed the payments.
Okay, so payments were current up through March 2022 or missed up through 2022?
Yeah, since March last month. So he missed the payments.
Just since last month.
Yeah.
Okay, and no rental assistance application was made?
Chúng ta chuẩn bị đơn hơn đúng không?
Có gì đơn á thì ở trên là chúng ta sẽ có gì đơn mà bên trong phòng nó thì nó
He said if he did apply, then we got a notice.
Okay. Is this in the city of San Diego or outside the city of San Diego?
ngồi ra
In the city of San Diego.
ngồi ra tôi phải nói việc tôi căn cứ nào đó đi phản nó nhiều nó nhà không có rồi đó tiền cái đó mất nhiều rồi á thì nước á tôi cũng không trả đủ ra số tiền nước ở cái nơi đây là ở đây là không biết tôi nói chuyện tôi bao đấy nó như vậy
So he violated a lot of rules. He said that he violated the few landlord independence when they moved in because he had a property, and he couldn't take care of the landscape because he doesn't have the money to take care of the landscape. And he said that he's been violating a lot of the lease agreement. And so right now he doesn't have, he can't work, and if he's unable to work, and if he can't pay the rent, so he's been missing the rent. And so are they allowed to, do they have the right to evict him?
So a landlord can evict a tenant if they don't pay rent, and if they break the lease, if they violate the lease.
So then the section 8 is currently paying half of his rent, and he's paying half of his rent. He's actually going to pay his rent. But the housing, the section 8 housing, continues to pay on time. Are they, how does that work? I mean, his part is not paying
He's
rent.
worried if he's subject to eviction even if the Section 8 housing is still paying for it. He's worried like if they're still paying for it, can he still be evicted even if they're still paying for it?
Yes, because they're only paying for half of it. And so part of the rent is not being paid. But if it's just non-payment of rent, you can apply for rental assistance through the 1 month away program, for instance. But the other issues, like the lease violations, have to be fixed, or the landlord can legally evict a tenant.
Gọi năm 2018 á, năm 2018 thì có one yearly after 2018 tới bây giờ month to month thì tôi hỏi như vậy thì nếu chủ nhà người ta đưa ra là cái áp dụng là 5 ngày hay là 60 ngày 90 ngày.
Okay. So he has been living in the house with his family. Okay, so there's a 1 year lease, and right now it's from month to month. So if they were to evict him, how many days of notice the landlord will give him if the eviction takes place?
So it depends on why the landlord is evicting. If the landlord is evicting because of a broken lease term, like having a pet when you're not allowed, that's 3 days. The landlord will give you 3 days to fix the problem. If there's a reason though, you mentioned security as a reason for breaking the lease. Not that the breaking the lease is permitted, but a landlord is required to have working locks on doors. So if that were the case, that might be something where Patricia could help in writing a letter to the landlord if the locks are not working properly or something like that. But if there's no pet allowed, you have to get rid of the pet to prevent an eviction.
Các trường hợp á, chúng năm nhà năm thì không có tiền, giờ chúng bạn không có tiền thì có ba đứa còn nhỏ, 3 tuổi, 5 tuổi, đứa 9 tuổi, với 3 đứa. Tôi thì tôi chứng minh được là tôi nhận đi bác sĩ là tôi cao lắm, tiểu đường từ năm qua. Thì đạt trường hợp đúng trường hợp này sau 5 ngày tôi không thấy kè thì tôi đi đâu.
So he said that, you know, for example, he could prove that he doesn't have money in his bank or he is unstable and he has no children in the home. And so after 3 days, the landlord has went to evict them. If they don't move out, what will happen to them?
Okay, so in an eviction process, if a landlord gives you a notice and you don't move out, the landlord then goes to court and files an unlawful detainer action. That paperwork then gets sent to the tenant. The tenant knows about it and has to respond within 5 business days, 5 court days. That means that you have to go to the downtown courthouse and file what's called an answer. It's pieces of paper, the packet of papers, where you check the box on all of your defenses. And some of those defenses can be related to the notice. Remember I said the notice has to have specific language, it has to be the right notice, it has to have the right period of time. They can also be defenses like harassment or retaliation or that the landlord wasn't keeping the property up to code, or they didn't have locks on the doors. They didn't have a working plumbing or working air conditioner or heating unit. So that form would have to be filed within 5 days.
Nhất trường hợp á, chủ nhà nên là chủ nhà luôn, chủ nhà nó là không có đồ, có tiền luôn, mình còn tu là mình vi phạm, nhưng bây giờ chỉ nhưng là tòa chỉ là trong nhà, chủ nhà đúng là sai mình không nói gì hết, nhưng cũng là nếu mà ra trong nhà, thì là còn
So you said that even if the landlord has upstate, they don't think that right, and he's in the wrong, for example. But within a short period of time, he has small children, where would he go if he got evicted?
That's where he would go would depend on the resources that he can find. It's very difficult to find Section 8 housing right now. It's important to be in compliance with the lease. Feel free to jump in if you have any words of wisdom.
I'm ready to suggest them to fill that out.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you have any thoughts on how you would help them specifically, but they can certainly.
Yes, also just let them know if they need help, we can provide assistance during the conversation.
Oh, like with the court paperwork, can you do that?
No, if they want to come to the office and talk to us, we can provide it demonstration.
Okay, so, okay.
chủ nhà không phải sai, chủ nhà phải sai hoàn toàn. Nhưng mà cái lúc của bà thì cũng có, và lúc bà thì không có chứ và thì chúng mình thì
I understand. I think it's important
So he's basically wondering where would he stay, so it's kind of
For until we can find new housing if he does get evicted. Is there temporary housing programs that he can apply to? Because he has 3 small children and he just wants to know where him and the 3 children and his family can stay while they wait to find new housing. Because right now he doesn't have money in the bank. I also got from him that he did go to the doctor and he has been diagnosed with something that probably prevents him from working. And is there like a disability, like rental assistance or anything like that if you're out of work so you can't work? But I think the biggest issue is he wants to know like where to go, at least for the temporary housing until they can find new housing.
Yeah, let me see if Patricia has any recommendations. Do you do work with housing, finding housing? No. Do you know about temporary housing resources? Okay. Well, no, because I think she just started missing her payments in April, is what I'm gathering. So, that's what it sounds like, yeah. Okay, Patricia and I don't have any resources that we know about. There is a 1 month away rental assistance program, but if you think that you're gonna get evicted for, If you think that you have not been in compliance with the lease and could be evicted for that, then I would consider contacting the 1 month away program for a rent payment for a new lease and try to find and replace. Maybe try the city of San Diego and see if the housing commission can help with that.
Direct phone number or website that they can go to?
Yes.
What languages is it?
So the person who does the program speaks English and Spanish. But Patricia has interpretation services available through her that she might be able to, if they come in, to help with that, possibly.
And how fast would the 1 month away program, like, how fast would it take for it to kick in?
So the 1 month away is a 1 month rental assistance. It can be given pretty quickly if you had a 3-day notice to leave because you hadn't paid rent. But if you're applying for new rent, like let's say the situation is that you expect, there's no notice yet, right? Is there an eviction notice that's been given yet?
He said he had not received it.
But the landlord's called. The landlord's called, but there's no like written eviction notice yet.
Okay, but the landlord
Has called and
about the missing rent.
Yeah.
Okay, so that would be, it's very fast if you have a 3-day notice because they want to keep that out of court. If you don't have that 3-day notice, you can still apply, but if you're in violation of the lease, no, you have to know that you can get that, you can only get that assistance once. If you get that assistance and you pay the rent and then the landlord just decides to evict you at that point, then they can do that if you're not in compliance with the lease. When you've just paid rent and gotten evicted. So if you think that you cannot get compliant with the lease, you have to think about what's the best steps to take. Not for non-payment of rent, but the landlord could evict for another reason. Yes, and they're allowed to do that. And as long as they're not, sometimes they do that, sometimes they collect rent and through the rental assistance program, and then they evict and they're still collecting rent, they're not allowed to do that. But if they collected rent for the time that the tenant was in there, and then they had another reason, they can do that. There's no string attached to that rental assistance. The government didn't do that.
We need more navigators.
We need more resources
Yes,
too in the county and the city.
that work.
Yeah. And I've heard that Section 8, well, it was Ade saying Section 8 was 12 years in the meeting. Is that for a new Section 8 applicant?
Yes.
So a current Section 8 applicant could potentially find housing. Quicker than that, new housing or?
No, because when they move, they have to move somewhere in Section 8.
Yes.
And if they're all filled up, they're still back on the waiting list like everyone else. Yeah.
Yeah. Very sad. Yes.
Did he say he was disabled?
Yes.
Could he get Jonathan's contact for disability rights, maybe?
It's possible.
Reasonable accommodations.
It's possible. Yes.
Did you have a
It's
question?
possible. But I'm just thinking.
Because I know I've referred a few people to them because of that. Because I know that, disabilities is one of those things that isn't really covered here.
Yeah.
But I know that they can help them at least.
Yeah. Yeah. It's possible. I mean, again, if you're not in compliance with the lease, you're just, it's a very difficult situation.
Having to cost.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So basically what you're saying is you just really doesn't conflict.
Potentially, yeah. I'll continue in just a second. Yes.
What about if they have children under 18?
In terms of whether there's no special protection for a tenant who has children. The landlord can still do whatever they want as long as they follow the laws that we talked about. I'm not sure. So one thing we were just talking about is that for a disabled tenant, sometimes a disabled tenant can ask for reasonable accommodations. So I'm going to give some examples. I don't know that these would apply, but if, for example, a dog was needed related to the disability, that's a request that a tenant can make to a landlord that's called a reasonable accommodation. And a landlord is obligated to grant it if it's reasonable. And reasonable is that word that has to be interpreted and can be interpreted differently. So I'm not sure how far out of compliance the tenant is with the lease, but if it's just the dog, but aside from non-payment of rent, if it's just non-payment of rent and an illegal dog, if the illegal dog can somehow be related to a disability, the tenant can ask for a reasonable accommodation. And there's Disability Rights of California has a tenant phone number that you can find on their website that can answer those types of questions and help write those letters. I don't know, Patricia, do you write reasonable accommodation letters?
I will ask if they can give me all the information. I will call them back to
Okay.
see how we can work on that. So I will ask Ramla and to see how we can help in another way.
Okay.
It's nothing that I can promise. I don't make any commitments.
Yeah. Yeah.
Either of the programs have Vietnamese interpreters.
So
This is stuff that obviously we can take down and translate
Right.
to them, but it'd be better if they heard it from someone involved in the program themselves.
absolutely. Patricia has interpreters available that can help. So my recommendation would be to talk to Patricia, to get in touch with her. She has a form, or she can take down her number and her email, get in touch with her. Or have someone who speaks English get in touch with her. She'll arrange for an interpreter, and then you can talk through some of these questions. And she can possibly help with a reasonable accommodation letter. It won't help with the non-payment of rent, but we also have the 1 month away program that will at least get 1 month's rent covered. And then at that point, you have to find other resources. But it could at least buy some time to find a new place, to figure out another solution, to apply for disability benefits if that hasn't been done yet. Look at this to them. You had a question, I'm so sorry.
No, I don't have a question. It seems to me that we do have great resources. We have resources in every society. But when it comes to the bottom line, to actually help a person like this family, there is really no help. That is one. Two, if this person is on disability right now, because of family support, wouldn't it be a good thing for this person to apply for assistance from the county? And that would, especially if he has children, that they can support the children then. And also depending on where he lives or where they live, Okay, there's always assistance from the senator's office, from the assembly member's office, and from the council person's office. And I can tell you that because we do tabling at MTS at the trolley, and a lot of people that come to, we occasionally have a person that is homeless. And there is assistance from the housing commission. But when we tell that person, call this number, and they said, we already called this number, and nobody answers. And when they do answer, they don't know what we're talking about. So there is help if you get this right. Unfortunately, because they have this situation here with the renter, the landlord, that doesn't necessarily mean that they cannot get help from the powers that be. And I can tell you that because I do this all the time.
Do you have connections that might be of assistance to them?
Yes, I do, but that I don't know, right now, I don't know whether they do anything, but they need to connect with their senator.
Okay.
The assembly member, where, I don't know, where does he live?
He's asking to see if after, like, so
she was just offering some advice about contacting the senator or assembly person for the area where you live to let them know about your situation and what type of assistance might be available.
what's gonna happen if he gets that where would we say temporary housing, even if that like 1 month a week program helps him with that one, what happens?
What area do they live? Oh, this is perfect. This is, Councilman Elio Rivera can help out. That office can help out. Assembly member, Ila Weber can help out. Senator Tony Atkins can help out. I can assure you, I mean, they're gonna listen to me, but he has to come to them and say, I need help. And there's representatives that can help him. They can help him. And you can't. You know, you're here to give out resources and everything, but you can't help him. You know, and I don't know if Hannah can help or not. But it's really frustrating because they're sent round and round and round and round. And, you know, there's public money that is provided for all these resources. And again, there's not enough community health workers or persons that can literally take them by the hand and say, here is really help.
And that's so right.
This is why
I don't know if they themselves are already affiliated with the church.
we did talk about this before, like the ERAP program is the biggest protection that everyone had.
So Nathan Fletcher can help with this. Nathan Fletcher is in this district four as well. But, you know, somebody has to help by picking up the funds, and we have a problem here. These people are gonna be evicted, and what are we gonna have? Another homeless family. Might as well pick them up, take them to the homeless shelter, leave them there.
We do through there.
That's horrible.
We always tell
Maybe we can give him Christmas.
give the help.
Yes, I didn't have his yes.
But can somebody legally from your office, even if it's not a legal issue, can somebody help you from your office?
So that's the one walkaway program we're talking about. So it's money that we have that, 30 notices and for like pending cases
And
like
so
this.
who can help him fill out an application like right now?
If you didn't touch this one, we could. But you didn't have a 3-day notice.
But she's right, you're right. 1 month rent is only gonna get a person so far. That's the problem. If the problem to not pay rent goes beyond 1 month, that's where the gap is.
And if they go to the powers that be, all of them, to county, city, state, if they go to them and they find out who that landlord is, they can pick up the phone and say, you know what, we have a
We can
problem.
only bridge so many gaps between.
You know, we know that this, and this, and we know that these are the rights and the no rights or whatever, but at least we need for you to do another 6 months or something. And if we don't ask, we don't get.
Could you text it to my personal because my work
But
phone
it
is dead?
depends
I'm gonna
again
give it to
who's
them
gonna
so that
help.
they can contact me.
So another question that he has is that during the process Can anyone come to his house legally?
Okay, so no, not until he wins at court. So yeah, so when you file that paperwork in the courthouse in response to the eviction letter or the eviction notice, then the case will go to trial. You will have to appear at trial. Absolutely. Just make sure that he understands that he can, that the landlord cannot physically remove him, cannot change the locks, cannot remove the belongings that belong to him until the landlord wins that trial and pays the sheriff. And the sheriff will give him a 5-day notice. But if he goes down that path, he will also have an eviction on his record. So it's yes, exactly.
So if they get
You can get 1 month.
Yep.
Reasonable accommodation for the non-compliance. Those are your options.
Very sensitive question. Hold on. Yeah. So I have his name in there.
No, don't be embarrassed. No, don't be embarrassed. I'm here to help.
Could you write on there Jonathan's email and give it to you, okay? He's a disabilities rights guy.
Are you going to get into the urban league?
No.
Is urban league also for housing and they can have
Urban League can help find housing.
I don't know about, they actually find housing for displaced women and men that are held for the prisons.
Okay.
So if they do that, they may be able to help.
Yeah.
Big old thing.
Yeah. It's a difficult situation. Section 8 is a really
Oh.
difficult situation.
Yeah, but you know what? I really believe that if they go,
You know, I wish you were at that moratorium meeting, because you'll be amazed.
I'm an activist, that's why,
Oh no, that's
I
good. But like the one we were just listening to, get this. So the first half of it was voting on someone's salary to be like, what was the budget guy?
Okay, the first half. So those resources are things that I would reach out to. Yeah, for reasonable accommodation letter, possibly for the disability rights. Yes. That and Patricia might be able to help with that too. So Patricia, I would probably start with Patricia, talk to Patricia about all the different layers. There are a lot of them.
No, you're good. And I was just
Anyone else have any questions?
Like the UPAC is down to host as long as y'all want to stay. For the interpretation, though, I just wanted to do a check-in because it's 6:30. We can continue the Q&A maybe, but I'll leave it up to the interpreters if they want to continue that.
Absolutely. I'm not sure if anyone has any more questions either.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Report a potential
A potential scammer from a landlord?
claim to be a landlord.
Yes. The question was, how do you report a potential scammer? And it's a landlord who is doing the scamming?
He claims he's the landlord, but he says that at first I didn't know that he's not in the US, but then the more he talked about it, it looks like exactly the post that Maruve shared to me. He's saying that, oh, you should go through this, like through the Airbnb company, which is like an international company. It's like very well trusted or something like that. But to my knowledge, Airbnb doesn't do like a real estate agent thing. They only do like a short-term location rent or something like that. They don't deal with they don't serve as an agent between like the landlord and the tenant.
Right.
He was trying to use the Airbnb as like a trick to,
Yeah.
convince people that it is real, it's an international company, so you should trust it or something like that.
Yeah, California has on their website, there's the California, I have to look at the name for you, but there's like a consumer fraud or a way to report it, and I'll find that for you.
I cannot be 100% sure because I didn't send
That's okay. They don't make you have all the proof. Yeah.
It sounds like it's scary.
Yeah, I would definitely make sure that you report it so that they can look into it. I'll get you that.
So he's looking for a place.
Yeah. Is one of those things that is
Sorry. Because I didn't want to take time away.
Oh yeah. Okay.
An example of reasonable accommodation. I was asking, what would it look like for someone who lives on the second floor and there's just a staircase, but they have both legs amputated?
This program started.
What is the landlord obligated to?
Yeah. So the landlord is obligated to grant any reasonable accommodation request that's asked. What happens is reasonable becomes an interpretation that has to be sort of evaluated under the circumstances. So a disability is a big category, and almost anything can be a disability. But what accommodation is reasonable has to be looked at based on what the disability is, what the situation is, and what the option is that they're asking for. But a landlord cannot deny a reasonable accommodation request. So I know that doesn't give you the exact answer, but it kind of is one of those areas that has to be sort of figured out on a case-by-case situation between the landlord and the tenant.
For instance, just an example, if you need a wheelchair, if you need a ramp to get into the house,
Right. Right. But if the amputee is able to climb the stairs, then asking for an elevator to be installed would be unreasonable, probably. Just throwing it out there, I'm not sure. Because you have to look at the building, and you have to look at the age of the building, the situation. So, a Disability Rights California helps with those things.
Disability Rights California.
Yes, and they have a phone number, at least they used to, that a tenants hotline number, and I can look for that too.
Yeah.
That would answer those questions if you just want to talk to an attorney about it. The other option is California, well, Patricia could potentially help, you know, that tenant, or the Community Law Project's clinic hours. Going to them and talking to them about it, they might be able to do something as well. Did you get that information?
We can add it to the recording. And
Okay.
follow up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you go back to the legal resources.
A lawyer.
Thank you everyone for attending today. I really appreciate everyone coming out. Thank you for the presentations. We're happy to continue the conversations here, and hopefully we can exchange contact info as needed for that. Yeah, just for the sake of time, wanted to acknowledge it's 6:37. So of course, if people need to go, that's fine, and we can also stay a little bit longer in this venue, so no rush. The interpreters will be here till 7, and we're about done.
Yes, I'm done. If no one else has any more questions, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's very helpful. If you ever need to do another one of these, let us know. Yes. Yes. And I am trying to find resources.
Okay,
On that. You're gonna get that right now. Not at all. Yeah, I know, right? They're really trying to find it too. I don't know where they're gonna find it, but they're looking.
So the California
I know. I was in my bedroom cracking up. It was like, so you need to tell me, you guys approve this man. One man rate almost $4 million. And then you're gonna argue about this moratorium? I'm like, make it make sense. I was like, come on now.